was still breathing, but my son had already brought a notary into the ICU. My daughter-in-law slipped a pen into my limp hand while tubes fed into my veins, and my eldest daughter leaned close to my ear whispering, "Just sign it, Mom. It'll make everything easier." I didn't answer. I stared at the three faces around my bed and realized they didn't feel like my children anymore. Just strangers wearing the skin of the people I once raised. I used to think that when my time came, they would inherit everything. But a month earlier, I had made a choice no one knew about, a choice that would change everything. And in that moment, none of them were smiling. They never imagined their frail old mother could outmaneuver them. A few weeks earlier, I had been standing at the upstairs window of my house in Brookhaven, watching the evening light spill across the lake in soft pinks and golds. For over 20 years, I'd looked out at that view. Just beyond the retreat center I had built from scratch, a sanctuary I named Hartwell Retreats. It was a place for women like me, women who had lost someone, to come and remember themselves again. I had walked hundreds of grieving women through their first lonely holidays, their first birthdays without a partner, their first morning coffee in a home that suddenly felt too big. But that evening, something in the light felt different. Maybe it was just me, 70 years old and slower on my feet, or maybe it was the way my breath caught in my chest more often that week. Even when I sat still, my ribs felt tight, and the fatigue clung to me like a wet coat. I had been ignoring the warning signs for months, pushing through every ache because there was always someone to help, something to finish. Until the helping stopped, and the silence sat too long. On my desk was an email draft I'd been too afraid to send. The subject line read, "Widow's Grace." No recipient, just a blank address line waiting for courage. The message was short. I am ready to do something that has nothing to do with grief. I didn't fully know what I meant when I typed it. I only knew that Hartwell Retreats could not follow me into the years ahead. At least, not in the same way. That morning, I had spoken with Margaret, our director of care and my closest confidant. At 58, she was sharp, thoughtful, and carried her own kind of loss that gave her the rare ability to truly see others. She had been the only one to notice how winded I'd become during check-ins, how tightly I clutched the stair rail each week. That day, she had said gently, "Clara, maybe it's time you rest." Later that night, I sat alone in my office and opened the bottom drawer beneath my printer. Inside was a folder containing the first legal documents for a non-profit, Widow's Grace Foundation. It wasn't a company anymore. It was a legacy, a pivot. 3 weeks earlier, I had quietly transferred ownership of Hartwell Retreats to the foundation. Not a single share remained in my name. I hadn't told my children, Daniel, Sophie, or Lena. I told myself I'd explain when the time was right, but the truth was, I didn't trust what they might do if they knew. If you've ever held on to something in secret because you feared it would be taken from you the moment you spoke it aloud, then you'll understand. I closed my laptop that night and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. I barely recognized the woman looking back, but I gave her a small nod. She had done something brave. When I opened my eyes again, the world had changed. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, the beeping of machines kept rhythm with my pulse, and a dull light burned overhead. My throat was raw. Tubes ran down both arms. And somewhere close by, I heard them, my children, talking. Not about my health. About business. I kept my head still, pretending to be asleep, but every word sank into me like cold water. "She still has the paperwork," Daniel said. His voice was low, but it carried a sharp edge. "If we don't move now, it'll all be gone." "She's in no condition to argue," Sophie replied. Her tone was smooth, practiced, like this was just business, not about her own mother lying in a hospital bed. Lena spoke next. She was always the quiet one. Maybe she'd want to sign. Just to get it over with. For peace of mind. There was a pause, a heavy, knowing silence that told me they had already decided what they were going to do. I heard the scrape of a chair, footsteps moving closer, the rustle of a folder being opened, the pop of a pen cap. Even without looking, I knew what it was. Legal documents. Maybe the retreat. Maybe my house. I couldn't tell which. I tried to lift my hand, but it barely moved. My chest felt heavy, every breath a slow climb. Then I felt someone take my left hand, pressing something into it, the cold, smooth barrel of a pen. "Just hold it for her," Sophie said softly, almost sweetly. But there was no warmth. The pen rested in my palm, but my fingers wouldn't close around it. My body was weak, but my mind was sharp enough to understand what was happening. Lena leaned close to my ear. "Just sign, Mom. You won't have to think about any of this again." My eyes were open, but they didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they thought I couldn't see clearly enough to matter. I watched their faces blur into shadowy shapes, 3 figures I had once fed, bathed and comforted, now standing at the edge of my bed with a stranger holding a notary's seal. I didn't sign. My hand stayed limp. Sophie pushed gently, trying to guide my fingers, but I let the pen fall. It rolled down the blanket and stopped near my hip. No one said anything for a long time. Then Daniel let out a short, frustrated breath. He muttered something under his breath and walked out. Sophie followed. Lena hesitated for a second before leaving, too. The man in the suit left last. When the door closed, I shut my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but because the room suddenly felt colder, hollow in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. They hadn't come to see if I would live. They hadn't brought flowers, or even asked if I was in pain. They came for papers and a pen. I had given them everything once, when they were too small to do anything for themselves. And now, before I was even gone, they had come to take more. By the 3rd morning in the ICU, I was sitting up without help. The tubes were gone, and I could finally breathe without the oxygen clipped to my nose. My throat still burned when I swallowed, but it was better than before. The nurses checked on me every few hours, and I made sure to stay awake as much as I could. I wasn't going to drift off again. Not until I knew exactly what my children had tried to make me sign. That afternoon, Margaret walked in, holding a little paper bag from the cafe downstairs. Her reading glasses were perched on her head like always. When she saw me sitting up, her hand flew to her chest. "Clara, thank God." I was starting to worry. She set the bag on the table and pulled out a cup of coffee, placing it carefully in my hands. My fingers shook as I held it. "They came," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "I figured. Probably with documents. And a notary." I nodded. She didn't ask for more details. She didn't need to. Her face darkened in a way I'd only seen a few times before. "Daniel called the office," she said, her voice steady but tight. "Told the receptionist that since you were unwell, he would be taking over the retreat. Said you gave him verbal permission last month." The paper cup in my hand felt hotter. "He's just waiting on signatures," she added. I stared out the ICU window. All I could see was the top of a gray parking garage and a dull, empty sky. No water. No trees. Nothing soft. I had always known Daniel was ambitious, but I never thought he would circle like this while I was unconscious. Sophie would follow his lead. Lena would stay silent, like she always did, but silence didn't mean innocence. Margaret studied me for a long moment. "You don't have to fight this alone, Clara." I didn't answer, but my mind was already moving. That night, I asked the nurse for my bag. Inside was my phone, my reading glasses, and a folded sheet of paper with the password to my private email. I logged in, ignoring the dozens of unread messages. In my widow's grace folder were the official transfer documents. Hartwell Retreats had been legally handed over to the foundation 3 weeks earlier, signed in front of 2 witnesses and my lawyer. It wasn't mine anymore. But most importantly, it wasn't theirs either. I opened a new note on my phone and began typing. June 4th. ICU. Daniel brought a notary. Tried to force signature while I was sedated. Sophie present. Lena assisted. No prior discussion. No consent given. I saved the file, backed it up to the cloud, and emailed a copy to Margaret without a subject line. The next morning, I told the nurse I wanted to start walking again. She smiled, said she'd call physical therapy. 1 step, then another. My legs were shaky, but my mind was steady. They thought they had found their chance, that I was too weak to fight. They didn't know I'd already let go of the thing they wanted most. And that made me freer than I had ever been. The following Tuesday, they discharged me from the hospital. The doctor warned me to avoid overexertion and handed me a prescription for a heart monitor. He said I'd narrowly avoided a full heart attack. He called it a scare. I called it a shift. Not just in my health but in the way I saw things. Margaret picked me up. She had brought along a soft cardigan from my office and a tote bag filled with small containers of soup, crackers, and herbal tea. It was the kind of care that didn't ask for anything in return. We didn't talk much on the drive home. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. It was that my house felt different now. The silence inside seemed heavier, almost like it knew what had happened. The first thing I did after unlocking the door was walk straight to the guest bedroom closet. Inside was my safe. I opened it slowly, even though I already knew what was there. Every document was still in place: the trust transfer, the legal handoff of Hartwell Retreats to Widow's Grace, the board's letters confirming the change. My signature, the dates, the seals. All intact. I took photos of each page and uploaded them to a secure cloud folder. Then I placed the originals into a fireproof lockbox and hid it inside a smaller wall safe in my bedroom, one only my lawyer and I knew existed. By Wednesday, Sophie sent a text. "Hope you're resting. Let me know when we can come by." An hour later, Daniel messaged, "Let's talk this weekend." Lena didn't write, but I could feel her presence like a shadow. She had a way of being quiet without ever really disappearing. I didn't reply to any of them. The next day, an email came from the retreat's legal office. Apparently, Daniel had tried to schedule a meeting under my name, claiming he had authority to approve partnerships on my behalf. He didn't. And even if he had, that authority no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the Foundation's board. I forwarded the email to Margaret with the transfer certificate attached. I added one line. "Please make sure staff know. No permissions come from my children. All inquiries go through the board." That night, I sat in my kitchen with a bowl of soup Margaret had made. Out the back window, I saw the same patio where Daniel used to play catch with his son. The same garden where Sophie once hosted a birthday brunch for me, arranging everything like a magazine spread. The same corner where Lena planted tomatoes one spring, only to forget to water them until they wilted. It hadn't always been like this. But it hadn't changed overnight either. I took out my notebook and began writing down everything I remembered from the hospital. Every word, every look, every detail of what they tried to do. Then I made another list, not about memories but about actions. Call lawyer. Lock down communications. Alert the board. Install cameras. Change medical directives. Remove them from all emergency contacts. By morning, I'd sealed an envelope to my lawyer labeled, "Only open if Clara is incapacitated." Inside was the full log of events and a note. If they return, this is what they came for. By Sunday, I knew they would show up. They hadn't confirmed a time. That was never their way. Daniel had always assumed he could walk into my home without asking, and Sophie had learned the same habit. Lena's silence didn't fool me. It only meant she was waiting for the right moment. That morning, I kept things ordinary. I boiled water for tea, turned off the porch light, and checked the mailbox. I didn't want to look like I was bracing for them. I wanted calm. Just after noon, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Daniel got out first, buttoning his jacket like he was about to negotiate a business deal. Sophie followed in a crisp blouse and sunglasses, even though the day was gray. Lena came last, wearing sneakers and carrying a reusable water bottle, casual, like she thought it would make a difference. I opened the door before they could knock. They walked in without asking, without a greeting. I didn't offer one either. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, looking around like he was taking inventory. "We need to talk," he said, as if his voice alone carried authority. I sat in my usual chair by the window. They stayed standing. That suited me fine. Sophie pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the coffee table. She didn't speak. Lena glanced at it, then at me. Daniel began, "We've been thinking about your recovery, about what happens next. The family needs clarity. Direction." I said nothing. He opened the folder, revealing page after page. Power of attorney agreements, medical decision authorizations, documents granting shared interest in Hartwell Retreats, and a proposed joint account for managing finances. It was all there, neatly stacked, like a generous offer. "Just sign the first two," Sophie said. "It's temporary, just until you're back on your feet." "For peace of mind," Lena added, her voice soft. I leaned forward, closed the folder slowly and said, "No." Daniel stiffened. "You haven't even read." "No," I repeated. "Not today. Not any day." Sophie stepped back, blinking. Lena shifted, her hands tightening on her water bottle. Daniel's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't about control. I stood. You're right. It's about trust. The kind you broke the moment you brought a notary into my hospital room. The room went silent. I walked to the door, opened it wide. We're done here. Sophie snatched up the folder. Lena looked like she might cry, but didn't. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he walked past me. The door shut with a soft click. I locked it. My hands trembled for the first time all day. Not from fear, but from release. Something inside me had uncoiled. I hadn't just refused to sign papers. I had chosen myself. The Monday after they left, I didn't move much. I kept the curtains closed and my phone on silent. I let the hours pass without looking at the clock. I didn't clean. I didn't plan. I didn't speak. Sometimes stillness isn't emptiness. It's healing. By evening, I felt something shift. Not in a big way, just a small, steady change. I opened the kitchen window and let the late spring air flow in. Then I started cooking, not because I was hungry, but because I needed the smell of something warm and familiar. I made oatmeal with cinnamon and soft, stewed apples. That night, I called Margaret. I told her everything that had happened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask for more. When I was done, she simply said, "I'm proud of you." The next morning, I took an envelope from my desk drawer, the one marked for the board. Inside was a copy of the legal transfer of Hartwell Retreats, a log of my recent interactions with my children, and a letter making it clear that no family member was to have access to the property or be involved in decision-making at any level. I wasn't asking for permission. I was setting a boundary. That afternoon, I hand-delivered the envelope to the board's temporary office at the retreat. I didn't linger. I walked the grounds slowly once, as if saying goodbye to the version of myself who used to plant daffodils by the pathway and run meetings under the oak trees. Then I left. That evening, my phone lit up. First Daniel, then Sophie, then Lena. 3 messages in 1 hour. Mom, we need to talk again. It's not too late to fix this. Can we meet and clear the air? I listened to each one once, then deleted them. The next day, I opened my journal. This time, I didn't write about them or the hospital. I wrote about the girl I was before all of this. The girl who grew up in a small house in Ohio with a father who read the newspaper out loud and a mother who cut coupons every Sunday. She didn't own much, but she felt safe. She felt wanted. By Friday, I had mailed 2 letters. One to my lawyer updating my will and trust instructions, and another to a nonprofit that supported caregivers of aging parents. I offered to sponsor 3 families for a year, quietly and without my name attached. It wasn't about showing power. It was about remembering I still had it. That weekend, I cleaned out the hallway closet. Not for symbolism, just for space. I boxed up old towels and sheets for donation. I threw away shoes with worn soles. I reorganized my bookshelf and watered the plants. I wasn't rebuilding with bricks or furniture. I was rebuilding with breath. The following Monday, a large white envelope arrived by certified mail. I saw the return address before I even broke the seal. It was from Daniel's lawyer. I set it on the kitchen table and just stared at it for over an hour. The house was so quiet I could hear the wood floors creak every now and then. When I finally opened it, the papers inside were exactly what I expected. A formal petition for emergency guardianship. Daniel had gone to family court, asking for legal control over my financial decisions. Sophie and Lena had both signed, claiming they were worried about my declining judgment and erratic behavior. They called it love. They called it protection. But it wasn't either of those things. It was control dressed up in careful, legal words. What struck me most wasn't the content. It was their confidence. They truly believed I would fold. That I would panic. That I would shrink back into the mother who always gave in. But I didn't call them. I didn't shout or cry. I called my lawyer instead. By noon, I was in her office. Anita Meeks had handled the transfer of Hartwell Retreats and had known me long enough to read the truth between the lines. I handed her a folder with everything. Hospital records, notarized transfer documents, my journal entry about the ICU incident. Anita read slowly, making notes in the margin. When she was done, she looked up and said, "This isn't just defense. This is a pattern." She was right. We built a timeline together. Every text, every concerned visit, every attempt to push me into a corner. I even pulled security footage from the retreat's main office showing Daniel trying to get in 2 weeks earlier without permission. By the end of the week, we had filed a full legal response. Saturday came with a steady rain. I stayed in my robe and slippers, moving slowly through the house. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. Lena stood there holding a tray of banana bread. She was wearing the sweatshirt I'd given her on her first Mother's Day. She waited for a full minute before turning and walking away. I didn't open the door. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a different kind of list. Not legal, not financial. Just truths. I am not selfish for setting boundaries. I am not cruel for saying no. I am not broken because they left. I am not afraid of their silence. And I am not theirs to manage. I tucked the list into my journal and felt lighter. The next Monday, Anita called with news. The judge had reviewed Daniel's petition and flagged it for closer scrutiny. All our evidence had been accepted. There would still be a formal hearing, but the tone had already shifted. What they had painted as a rescue was now looking more like a takeover. When I hung up, I went to stand by the window. The street outside was calm. The sky had cleared. For the first time in weeks, I let myself smile. Not a guarded smile, but one that felt real. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. I wore my navy coat, the one I used to wear to important meetings at the retreat. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was before all this. A woman with presence, a woman who didn't shrink. Anita met me on the steps. She didn't give me a pep talk or say it would be okay. She just nodded and walked beside me into the small courtroom. Daniel sat on the opposite side with his lawyer. Sophie and Lena were there too, both in muted clothes, avoiding my eyes. I didn't expect them to look at me, and I didn't need them to. The judge, a woman with steady eyes and silver threads in her hair, read through the docket. Then she asked for opening statements. Daniel's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of me as isolated, vulnerable, and unable to make sound decisions. He used words like declining judgment and undue influence. I sat still, not flinching, because I knew what was coming next. When it was Anita's turn, she stood calm and clear. She spoke of my career, my work, and my independence. She laid out hospital records, the legal transfer documents, voicemails, and even security footage of Daniel trying to get into the retreat without permission. Then she read from the letter I had written to the board. The court does not need to protect me from others. It needs to protect me from the belief that family entitles anyone to my legacy. The room went quiet. The judge looked directly at me. Mrs. Hartwell, would you like to say anything to the court? I stood, my knees a little tired but steady. I didn't use notes. I said, I built my life with care. I gave my children more than I gave myself. But I will not spend my final years apologizing for needing peace. I am not confused. I am not unstable. I am awake. And I am not afraid of being alone. The judge gave a small nod. She didn't make a ruling that day, it would come by mail, but when Anita and I walked out, she touched my arm and said quietly, no matter what the letter says, you reclaimed yourself in that room. That night, I went home and made soup. Lentils and sweet potatoes. I lit the lavender candle Margaret had given me last winter and didn't check the mailbox for 2 days. When the letter finally arrived, I sat at the kitchen table and read it slowly. The court had denied the guardianship request in full. The judge even noted possible financial manipulation by Daniel and referred it to a separate civil inquiry. I didn't feel like cheering. I just sat there, letting the words settle inside me. It wasn't just a win, it was proof that I hadn't imagined everything, that what I felt was real. Later that afternoon, I took a short walk around my neighborhood. The air was soft, children were drawing suns on the sidewalk with chalk, and a woman passed me with her golden retriever. We shared a small smile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. That evening, I opened my journal and wrote. They tried to write the ending, but the story is still mine. And I'm still writing. 2 weeks later, the Hartwell Retreat's annual legacy dinner was coming up. It had been planned months ago. Daniel once suggested we use it to announce him as my successor. I hadn't cancelled the event. I had just changed the guest list. No family. No heirs. No speeches about passing the torch. Instead, I invited people who had once been turned away when the retreat became too exclusive. Teachers who used to bring struggling students, retired nurses who had asked to host support groups, the women's shelter coordinator who had emailed me 4 times before giving up. I told them the truth. This was no longer a family-owned retreat. It belonged to the community. The RSVPs started coming in. Some were short and polite. Others made me cry. One woman wrote to say her sister had found peace at a workshop here 10 years ago. Another said she never imagined she'd step into a place so beautiful. 3 days before the dinner, Daniel showed up in my driveway. No lawyer, no sisters. Just him, standing there with his hands in his pockets. I didn't invite him in. "What are you doing, Mom?" he asked. "Why are you throwing away the vision we built together? Why are you making this personal?" I looked at him calmly. "It's not personal. It's necessary. I spent too many years confusing love with loyalty. I won't do it anymore." He stared at me for a long moment, and there was no anger in his face. Just emptiness, like someone looking at a house he used to live in but no longer recognized. Before he left, he said, "You won't have anything left for us when this is done." "That's the point," I said. I closed the door, and for the first time in months, I didn't brace for the phone to ring. The silence felt clean. The night of the legacy dinner arrived quietly, without fanfare. I spent the morning baking a simple lemon loaf and ironing my old navy dress, the one I wore the day Hartwell Retreats first opened its gates. It wasn't new or glamorous, but it was mine. By sunset, the garden lights flickered on, casting a warm glow across the lawn. Chairs were arranged outside the glass house, and guests began arriving. I stood by the entrance, greeting each one. There was a woman with silver hair holding her young grandson's hand, a man in a postal uniform, a woman in a wheelchair being pushed by her granddaughter. None of them were dressed up. None expected anything fancy. Inside, the tables were covered in plain linen. On every plate, I had placed a handwritten note. "You belong here." When it was time, I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't give a long speech. I told them about the early days, about how this place was meant to be open to everyone, about how somewhere along the way I lost sight of that, and how I'd finally made the choice to return it to its true purpose. Then I told them the most important part. Hartwell Retreats now belong to the Community Trust, permanently. There would be no inheritance battles, no loopholes, no reversal. This land was theirs forever. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one person stood, then another, and then the whole room rose to their feet. Not clapping, just standing in quiet respect. Tears glistened in more than one pair of eyes, including mine. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the candles had burned down, I walked through the retreat one last time. The library, the meditation room, the little nook by the stairs where I used to drink my coffee before sunrise. Every corner held a memory, but none of them held me anymore. When I got home, I found a small envelope taped to my kitchen counter. No name, just a folded piece of notebook paper inside. It was in Sophie's handwriting. I didn't understand. I still don't. But I'm sorry. There was no request, no condition. Just that line. I placed it gently in the drawer by the stove. Not because I forgave her yet, but because it no longer hurt to read it. That was my lesson in all of this. Sometimes peace doesn't come from getting back what you lost. It comes from protecting what's still yours. Your dignity, your choices, your voice. People will tell you that family is everything, but I've learned it's not true. Not if family uses love as a mask for control. What matters is surrounding yourself with those who want you to be free, not owned. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was free. If you'd like, I can now give you a one-line powerful moral statement to use at the very end of the video for maximum emotional impact. Would you like me to do that? Ask ChatGPT.